Good morning, good evening, good day. Wherever you are in the world, welcome back to another episode of Our Finding Show. I'm Harrison Bell.
My name is Mir+harry.
And we are joined by a very special guest today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Caroline Donahue.
All right. Love to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So today, we got actually a very unique perspective because we have a young, very successful, actually a lot of potential for future success too. Successful to this point? Are you loaded like that?
You know what? I would say the second point stands stronger than the first one does, with potential for success. But I'm working up to it.
Okay,
well, I think that's all of us at this stage.
It is all of us at this stage.
It should be okay.
But so Caroline is on the pre-law track here at NYU. So we thought it would be a good idea to get another perspective outside of kind of the business and finance world that Mir and I pertain to, essentially.
That's right.
So today we have a few questions to ask Caroline of really, kind of our niche. What is it like growing up in the world as a young student in higher education? How is the job market changing? And frankly, is there a job market for us anymore? I'm not sure we even know, honestly.
We do talk about this a lot.
So a few questions for Caroline. We're going to have a great episode. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for
having me, guys.
To start, so Caroline is here at NYU with us, and she is in the Global Liberal Studies program.
Sure I am,
That's
yes.
right. So that is pretty much a pre-law major, as far as I understand.
Okay.
And obviously, there's a lot going on in the legal world these days. Trump administration, tariffs, all sorts of stuff that we've talked about before. But we have an expert here today. So honestly, I want to explore just a few things with Caroline today. The first thing is obviously, I want to just get your perspective on how you're feeling, getting into the job market. What you're doing? Are you applying for internships? Are you applying for some kind of, I don't know, what are law internships? Clerkships with judges, or is that after you go to law school? I'm not sure the situation.
Good question.
Yeah. So clarification first, Harrison, you said that I'm an expert in law, and I want to clarify for everybody, I absolutely am not in law school yet. Second year undergrad. I have a concentration in law, so I study a lot of SCOTUS cases. I study a lot of constitutional law. No expert by any means. I do have a lot of opinions, and I have a lot of feelings about what's happening in the world right now.
I love opinions.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. As for the job market, I think it varies depending on what students want.
Okay.
Exactly. It depends if you want to be a corporate lawyer, if you want to go more into humanitarian law. As of right now, finding internships has proven to be pretty difficult, but I'm staying optimistic. And one thing I'm doing, and I've been trying to do since I was kind of in high school, is trying to do as much volunteering as possible too. Because I think a lot, especially if you're applying to law schools or grad school, they're going to want to see some kind of experience, but it doesn't always have to be within the work itself, because obviously you don't have a law degree yet. You can't practice law as an intern.
Right.
So they want to see you care about the community, why you're doing law, not just doing it to make money, to do it to actually help people with their lives.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great point about making money that you bring up. Is that something that is the main driver for you, or what is the main driver for you of wanting to do law and maybe helping people out? Is that something? What would you say?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously everyone has to make an income to sustain themselves. It's kind of just the way our world works. But in terms of that being my main priority, I would say probably not. There's this really great quote, and I wish I could remember who it's by, but it's in one of my favorite books of all time called Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, who is an amazing lawyer. And it says that justice is the instrument, but love is the motive. And that's kind of what, I don't really know if I'm going to be a lawyer. There's a lot of time between now and when I'd go be applying to law school. But whatever I do, I kind of want it to pertain to be around that concept.
They made that into a movie, didn't they?
They sure did. It's a great movie.
Michael
B. Jordan.
I like that
Michael
quote
B.
a lot,
Jordan.
actually.
I see why you like it now.
That's funny. But no, about the money thing, like yesterday I was at a PwC networking event at NYU, and I happened to talk to this guy that also was a GLS major, actually. And so he was actually talking to us and saying, you can make it as a GLS major to do anything you want, because there's kind of sometimes this kind of idea that GLS is, maybe kind of a narrow niche, right? Especially pre-law, but he's doing consulting and stuff. So, and he's just a really interesting guy. So I went up to talk to him, and he had some great insights. But then one person asked him, why are you doing consulting? Is that something that's really interesting to you? And at this point, I'm like fully into the consulting thing. I'm like, dang, this is some of the coolest stuff ever. You get to travel every week. You get to solve problems for people. That sounds awesome. But his answer was, honestly, I have a really nice apartment and a car. And honestly, it broke my heart, because I would do this kind of work almost for free. And is that something that you can kind of relate to? Is like, seeing a lot of people around us doing it for the money, but you kind of want to do it for the love, for the passion.
For the love.
Yeah.
Obviously, as everyone who will tell you who's in the same kind of law that I want to go into, the same kind of politics I want to go into, you're not doing it for the money. And if you are doing it for the money, you are severely miseducated about how much money you're making in this field.
Right.
But that is so true. It's so sad how many people forgo their passions for the amount of money they want to make. I was in class a couple weeks ago, I remember, and most of my GLS classes are pretty small and condensed, but I was taking one for an elective, so it was a very big between schools classes. And the professor, I forget what we were talking about, but he asked a question. He said, how many of you are majoring in something that you're really, really passionate about and you have always wanted to do? Mm-hmm. I raised my hand, and I think like 3 other people in a class of 25 did too. And that was it.
Do you think at all that you're motivated to go into law because that's really what the economy is telling you to do right now? I know a lot of people will go, when the economy gets tight and a recession, people fear a recession, they go into medicine and they go into law. Does our changing dynamic and really just the state of geopolitics around the world, do you think that has motivated you in any way? That can be in humanitarian, in a humanitarian way, you want to get into law to help people, or just in terms of financial freedom and just being able to provide a good life for your family. What do you think about that? Does that more motivate you?
Yeah, I think there's 2 different sides to that coin. So first of all, we see law school applications going up a ton over the past admission season.
Yes.
So much. And maybe that is a recession indicator. I can totally see that happening, but also I can see the flip side of it. People may not want to go into law anymore because as of right now, law in our country, it's kind of obsolete, especially in the executive administration. People just aren't going by lawfare anymore. And that's a really interesting place to be as someone who is in pre-law looking to go to law school, being in a country where very, very powerful people are not following the law and we're not really adhering to this common law process that we have for hundreds and hundreds of years. I can see how people also may be discouraged from applying to law school or trying to practice law.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by the executive branch kind of not following the law? Because you touched on this.
Yeah, sure. So especially what we have with immigration happening in our country right now, we have a lot of immigrants being deported, illegal or not, with green cards or visas unlawfully. Because I want to clarify this too. The Constitution specifically does say all people have a right to due process. It doesn't say all American citizens have a right to due process. That's the 5th and 14th Amendment. It's written in the text right there. And all people do have a right to due process. And that's just not the lawfare we're seeing being followed in our country right now.
That's actually interesting. I hear you there because I saw a recent tweet or actually post on X by JD Vance, our vice president. And he talked about due process, but he did not mention what you were saying about the American citizen versus all people. So that is something to think about. I'm sure so that is manipulation of the law is a big,
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that's definitely something to think about. Yeah. At the same time, the American Constitution was, in my eyes, made for American citizens as well. That's who it was originally written for. It was for the nation, made for American citizens. So in some ways, Constitution is one of those things that people love to misinterpret and interpret in their own way. I think saying that, the current administration is not necessarily sticking to the law, I think that's also a constitutional interpretation question, don't you think?
I totally agree with you. It depends on the way you determine the Constitution, which I think is interesting too between political parties because, obviously you have people agreeing with the president's action or JD Vance's action, immigration's actions, depending upon their political party, which it goes into the entire idea of identity politics, which is a whole different conversation. But in general, right now, what I will say is in the past, conservatives have been very much adherent to a strict interpretation of the Constitution.
This is incredibly true. William Rehnquist.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what the Constitution says, what the text says, that's what we do. Liberals, or people on the Democrat side, have always used the living Constitution interpretation, meaning, we're going to interpret the Constitution based on what society needs right now, what our social norms are right now. It's how they passed Roe v. Wade. And famously, it's how conservatives overturned Roe v. Wade by using the strict original approach to the Constitution. We see that being flipped now. We see conservatives abiding by a living Constitution approach, saying we have an illegal immigration invasion, we need to use the Constitution to address our problems right now, where Democrats are kind of the ones saying, no, the Constitution says this, therefore we must do it. So it's interesting to see that flip.
This is actually incredibly true. And it's one of my biggest critiques of the Republican Party right now, because William Rehnquist in his reign, as he's obviously, he's a little bit overshadowed. He was the Chief Justice on the Supreme Court for a very long time until his death in 2005. And he was known as a federalist, really a constitutionalist. You know, he essentially was famous for really, like Caroline was saying, adhering to the Constitution very strictly. And I think being a federalist also means that, you remind me what that means, Caroline, roughly, but I think my understanding is that it's kind of when you essentially... No.
Well, you don't have to know what it means exactly, but,
no,
but at the end
I
of the
knew
day,
it at one point, but now I don't, sadly.
Yes. So, I mean, you're just talking about the kind of the stricter interpretation. I never thought of it that way, actually, that it's kind of starting to flip now. And, you know, what you actually, interestingly enough, I want to preface this to the audience, you know, you're a very smart person, but you decided to come on our podcast. You kind of reached out to us when you saw our podcast, which is actually very flattering, very flattering for us that we have some people that actually want to come on and talk about this stuff. And obviously, you know, you're a great guest to talk about this because you know a lot. But, you know, what are some things that are really, it seems like, bothering you in this administration? What are some things that are standing out to you specifically that we could potentially address on this podcast?
Oh, wow. That's a very, very loaded question. What's bothering you about this administration?
Yes.
God, I would say overall, my biggest qualm with it is kind of the overall lack of lawfulness that we see happening with so many different aspects. We talk about immigration, we talk about DOJ, and also just on like a moral standpoint, I don't think anybody can look at what's happening right now and not see just an unusual amount of cruelty in it too.
Towards who?
Towards everybody, towards the American people, honestly. We can say that they're targeting people on the left, but in all honesty, the things that this administration is doing is targeting everyday Americans. And you see it with a lack of respect towards people, with the language that we use. You know, people may say words can't hurt you, but when it's the President of the United States, words hold a lot of power. And when they're being used to directly, disproportionately impact groups of people, I don't really have words for how harmful it can be to communities as a whole and for the American people as a whole.
What do you think about this, buddy?
I think... I'll let you answer this one. What do you think?
You know, frankly, I definitely agree with you to some extent that the current, you know, president is not necessarily the most...
not the kindest man in the bunch.
So first of all, he's not the kindest man. He's also not the most conventional man. He's not a politician.
No.
He's not afraid to you know, say things and then revert back to them. But I would kind of want to push you back on the idea that the American people the everyday Americans are suffering from this. What are some kind of examples that you see of this?
Well,
because
I think for one is the Federalist thing. So I did look it up, right? And obviously it is, and I don't know why I blanked on it because I've written an entire paper about it.
Hey, that's okay because our podcast is all about learning. We're not actually experts.
That's true.
We're trying to have
my understanding is federalism is about really putting taking the power out of the hands of the federal government and putting it to the states. Now we see the hypocrisy with the interpretation of the Constitution. How do you think that the American people are being affected outside of, you know, for example, immigration policy, talking about due process? How do you think the American people are affected with this kind of, obviously this lapse in the conservative, you know, in the GOP about, you know, with they're saying one thing, really doing another. And obviously they say they want they say they want power in the hands of the states. But then obviously they're making very, very, really impactful federal decisions oftentimes. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that honestly one of the most distrustful thing a government can do is keep going back and back and back and back on its word. And honestly, it's one of the biggest problems I have with the Democrat Party right now, how much they push their values around to make them make more sense for the average voter. And I don't like it. If you're going to believe something, then obviously change your mind with further education, with developments in the world. But when you're pushing something back and back and back and pulling people every which way, not only does that create so much instability for the economic world, but it creates so much instability between people. And what we see, I'm sure you guys can agree with this, right now, the political division in our country is some of the worst I think it's ever been.
I agree.
And
100%.
I can't sit here and say that it's not because of this constant push and pull and the constant going back and forth on promises that we see from politicians, specifically within the Trump administration. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of like active lie count on Donald Trump right now, and I'm sure it's in like the 100,000s.
You mean President Trump? That's what the liberals do. The liberals call him Donald.
They
It's
call him
President
Donald?
Trump. Continue on.
Mr. Trump,
It's
yes.
President Trump, yes.
That's right.
So actually, it's interesting. There are subtle ways that we can kind of figure out what political leanings a person has.
Yeah,
For
it's
example,
so interesting.
It's
You totally
actually,
can.
yeah, we should talk about this because
That's one of them.
saying Donald Trump is versus President Trump. What's your leader? You're saying President
I'd say
Trump?
President Trump just because
I'll say it too.
I want to respect the office, but obviously
Funny,
I
I
don't.
didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. I think the other thing, which is actually pretty ridiculous, is calling the insurrection. When you hear the word insurrection, you just know
the
that
January
person
6th insurrection.
the insurrection.
The insurrection.
That's the other
Yeah,
thing.
or the January 6th riots.
Or the riots.
You get that
Yes,
a lot
that's
from
the other
liberals.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
that-
the biggest thing that you said is basically that a lot of the push and pull is
Yeah.
coming from the Republican Party, and I agree 100%, especially with Trump kind of being a guy that keeps going back on his promises, and that's 100% true. I just think that we always have this shut opinion of who is doing it and who's not doing it. I think both parties do it equally the same. I say
One thing
this.
we can definitely agree on.
Yes, I think right. And I think the way that Trump does it makes it, he always is trying to make a deal, which is something
He's a deal maker for
it's
sure.
hard for me to criticize him at any particular moment, because you never know what his actual intention will be. For example, with the tariffs, we saw him implement these crazy tariffs that made no sense. They didn't have any discrimination on any particular group of imports or exports. It just had nothing to do with any kind of reality. But then he pulled them back, and you got 70 people on the, lined up, 70 countries lined up for
wanting to
negotiations.
make a deal. Yeah.
I mean, we saw, a lot of hedge fund guys calling it the art of the deal.
They said, yeah,
And to me,
art of the deal.
to me, that's where the push and pull comes from. It's definitely very destabilizing for our country, but I don't necessarily see it as a bad move politically. Do you know what I mean by
Yeah.
that?
No,
In terms of having what exactly? In terms of having Trump in office simply, or just
Having that push and pull, having saying that, we're going to institute these tariffs, but then pull them back.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
A few hours after
Yeah.
they've been
What do you
instituted.
think about that?
So, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's not my expertise, but are you talking about the push and pull, especially when it comes to tariffs, of the stock market going up and down?
I'm specifically talking about, kind of having all this uncertainty around what people are saying. You're talking, the push and pull that you were referring to is more like telling something or promising something, but not delivering on it, right? Is that what you were kind of mentioning?
Yeah, but it goes
with
into what you're
politicians?
saying a little bit too.
It does, because with the tariffs, we had all this craziness with the stock markets too. On these tariffs will get implemented, and then they were pulled back very quickly, and then but it did in the end result for something positive in our country, which is reevaluating our trade agreements with other countries.
Right, which definitely were unfair towards the U.S. in a few capacities.
Right. So that's one way where I see the push and pull actually working in the positive for America, right?
Right, but my question would be for who? So we saw a lot happening with the stock market, and what I will say, this is maybe getting into conspiracy theory era, and you can stop me if I'm wrong, but a lot of what Trump was doing, a lot of what higher ups were doing maybe was, they're not letting the regular American people who, a lot of people say the stock market isn't a good relative look at our economy, which is true. People do have money in the stock market, though. Average Americans have money in the stock market. I know I heard you guys talking. You guys do too, right?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
We're
So
big
people
investors.
have money in this. And when people
Huge
higher
investors.
Loads of money
Yeah.
invested. Yes.
people higher up in government, people who have a lot of success, a lot of power, they're going to be let in on things that are happening when it comes to tariffs or stock markets going up and down and given the upper hand in that, while American citizens aren't. That's what I mean by push and pull harming the everyday American citizen while it's benefiting the top percent.
So yes, I would agree with that. And you're talking about people on both sides of the aisle, though, because
Oh my
obviously
gosh,
Nancy
yeah.
Pelosi is just as guilty of this as
Just
the
as
rest
guilty,
of them. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. So the biggest thing you referred to, the polarization in our country, right? The political polarization, which I think is one of the biggest things affecting us in America right now. We are so divided amongst lines. You are a little bit more left-leaning. We are a little bit more right-leaning, as we've discussed in this podcast. And the fact that we're able to have this conversation right now is a miracle, to be honest with you. Because
I would agree.
With people at NYU, it's very difficult to... I just want you to hear this perspective from us as kind of moderate conservatives, is that it's really hard to bring up some of these topics in class. We fear, as kind of a little bit conservative. I mean, we're not conservatives in any sense of the word, but we're kind of leaning that way a little bit at the moment. And we aren't scared to bring up our opinion in class. We're scared that the professors will devalue our grade because of it. We are scared that we will be ostracized from our peers. We're afraid that peers are going to judge us. And I think that's actually the biggest thing when NYU always talks about this inclusive language that we have to use, or inclusive, including everyone in the conversation. I think a lot of times that's interpreted as including every race, gender, right?
I can't think of a class that I've had recently where the professor doesn't make a snarky comment.
What kind of snarky comment?
Or about Trump or about some policy or something like that.
Or about the Republican Party.
Or just about the Republican Party, for example, in economics and public policy, we talk about tax policy a lot of the time. Oftentimes, anytime there's a slightly, more conservative tax policy, he'll maybe bring up an example of it being implemented somewhere and potentially being a net negative to the population of the people.
Right.
Versus, more progressive, or even I want to say, dare I say, socialist tax policies that frankly we already face in many places that we live, such as Manhattan and definitely in Multnomah County back in Portland. He won't say the same thing. He'll just say, oh yeah, this is one way to do it. So what do you think about this? This is obviously something that...
So I want to ask you something. You mentioned something about inclusive language in class. What did you mean by that?
Right. So NYU, we see these posters all around that are saying, let's participate in the conversation together. Let's kind of be open to conversation and whatnot. I don't know if you've seen those in Bobst and whatnot. And a lot of what I think the connotation behind that is, let's include every single kind of perspective of ethnicity, race, gender, and whatnot together, which I'm fine with. But I think that it's missing including the conservative point of view perspective in that inclusive language, because even the same professors that are pushing this inclusivity and openness to conversation are totally ostracizing the conservative opinion. Because if we listen, let me just give you an example.
No, please do.
Yes. In our environmental studies class last year with Harrison, we had this extremely liberal professor. And it's environmental studies, so of course it's kind of like one of those, maybe a little bit of a left-leaning subject.
We knew it would be left-leaning right from the start.
Very hybrid car.
Yes. But she was...
I do, yeah.
Yes, she was especially passionate about this stuff. And basically, in order to get basically every time that Harrison and I would say anything outside of her exact words, her exact interpretation of the political spectrum, she would say, oh, you guys are not understanding the material that we're learning. You guys aren't getting it. You guys aren't getting what the readings that I'm providing you, which are, by the way, coming from these crazy left-leaning sources like Democracy Now! And what else, which is completely not academic at all. In my view.
No, it's not. This is totally true. Continue on, but I have a point.
So what I was trying to say is, imagine that we were to bring up our opinion in that class. Imagine if we were to say, actually, I think fracking is good because it'll lower the cost of energy for the American people. What she's going to say? She's going to say, you don't get it. You don't understand it. You are not in the know about anything. And you're actually going to get a bad grade on this assignment because of this. She
would actually grade it badly. She was a nice woman, to be honest with you. She was actually, yeah. But the way the class was structured, I really do disagree with. But also, a lot of these readings were really, really intense. I mean, they were basically saying that in some cases that we should give up land back to the Indians that were here before us.
Like all of it.
Like pretty much all of it. And I think that's, first of all, it's not realistic. And I don't like living in La La Land a lot of the time. But second of all, obviously what we did to the Indians was very bad. The colonialism in general is terrible. I think we can all agree on that. But she was basically encapsulating climate change, indigenous land rights, and many other kind of definitely debatable topics or controversial topics all into one, and basically delivering it to us in this very, very straightforward package that was, you take it or you don't take it. And if you don't take it at all, and you did not basically recite word for word what she would say in the lectures, you would get a bad grade on the thing.
Can you kind of see what we mean by
1,000%?
Yeah.
Yeah. And a couple things I want to say about that. First of all, no respectable teacher should ever be giving you a bad grade because of whatever your opinion may be.
Right.
They can give you a bad grade because your opinion isn't founded in evidence or because you're spewing hate speech. I can totally see that happening.
Right.
And it has happened before. And in that case, I would totally support a professor speaking out and saying something. In terms of the grades or in terms of degrading people's intelligence, there's no world in which that's okay. The one thing I will say is that college is different than high school in many, many different ways. High school, you are there to learn specialized skills to get you into college. There to learn math, English, whatever it may be. When you're in college, you're learning from very, very passionate people who have a specialization in the exact class that you're taking. So first of all, we have to acknowledge, I'm not saying that everyone's opinion doesn't matter, because it does, but these people do have a different lens and have studied this passionately for years and years and years. Third, I think that the point of a classroom is to debate and interact with each other. Just as much as I'm allowed to disagree with my classmate and to give evidence to what my point is, your teacher is allowed to do that to you too. They should be able to push back on you at certain points if they disagree with them, and you should be able to push back on them if you disagree with them. There should be an interactive environment there where you are going back and forth. You should never 100% agree with anything anybody in class is saying unless it's a verbatim fact. And I really do believe that. Classrooms are a place for discussion and learning, both between students and between students and faculty too. So I'm not going to fully disagree with your professor questioning maybe some of your claims, because maybe she had a good reason to. What I will say is I can never support her giving you a bad grade or diminishing your intelligence because of your opinion. Ever.
Definitely. I think questioning, there's a fine line between questioning and then taking action.
So yes, and what you bring up is completely fair and true. I mean, once you get to know this subject, you kind of understand that the conservative point of view once you get to know it at a very deep level, it seems that a lot of professors go into one political kind of point, which is the left. And that's my issue, is that yes, 100%. I think I should be questioned all the time. I think that the fact that we're here in higher education, the whole point of us being here at university
is questioning what we know and what
questioning
we think we know.
Everything
exactly.
we know,
That's the point
everything
of
we know. But my issue is that if a student raises a point about a left-leaning opinion, they will not be questioned. I think that the professor needs to question the left-leaning opinions and the right-leaning opinions the same way, despite their own political beliefs. That's the whole point of learning, because we need to be questioning basically we need to be critically thinking about everything that we do and everything that we learn. And so that's my biggest issue, because yes, what you're saying is true on paper, but that's not exactly how it works in the class.
Mm-hmm. So this kind of is a great segue into the next point that I want to talk about with you, is the social media aspect. Mm-hmm. So I've actually seen that the kids these days, folks our age, actually are coming around a little bit. It's almost as if the left has gone far too far, has almost been too extreme in a way. And I think social media has exacerbated this. I want to hear your opinion on it, though. I think, kids and young adults are almost tired of these narratives. But the professors and the older folks, they still stick to them true the same way they did 5-6 years ago. But it's definitely really not really cool to be an activist anymore on social media the way it was 5 years ago or so. So what do you think about that? Do you think that I guess my specific question is, do you think that this phenomenon has actually created a bit of a fallacy in the left-leaning party, and did it potentially even result in the election of the 2024 election outcome? Yeah,
I think it's really interesting that you use the word cool in that, because I think it's a really, really important part of this too. So we see how kids are generally attracted to things that are a little bit more fringe, a little bit more counterculture. In the 1960s, that was the hippie movement. They wanted to reject everything their parents taught them, what society views as normal. They wanted to create their own normal. They wanted to rebel against, what they saw society as and the harms in it. And then I would say through like 2010 through 2020, we kind of had this big pendulum swing to the left. People were getting, very, very liberal about DEI policies, about LGBTQ policies, about creating spaces for Black and brown people, especially in that regard too, with the social issues. I think it's a big thing too. And that kind of became the norm after a while. When at first it was the counterculture, that perspective, the liberal perspective, became the social norm. It's what people were expected to abide by. Now, people or kids coming in, especially this new generation of Gen Z, specifically the lower portion of it, people who were born way later, they see that as a social norm. Therefore, they are, more willing to rebel against that. They're more wanting to be different. They're wanting to rebel against what society tells them to do.
That's really interesting, actually. Mm-hmm. You bring up these points that I never even thought about, to be honest with you. Like, I never thought that rebelling against what these kids, kind of the younger Gen Z generation, believe. To them,
so they're rebelling against the older generation Z. They're saying
they're rebelling against DEI policy specifically because that's all they've ever known.
Right, that's all they've ever known. Gotcha.
That's actually super interesting. But
yeah, so in a way, rebelling against the older folks who kind of instituted those. Yeah,
I suppose older. When I think of older, I think of like
50, 60.
old.
Right. No, but I'm talking about like millennials.
You're talking about millennials.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
They're rebelling against millennials.
That's what I mean by older.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting point that you bring up.
I actually agree with it 100%. Do you?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, social media has honestly made polarization a lot worse because it's actually cool to disagree. It's, as we see a lot of times, it's not cool to agree.
No.
It's not like that doesn't drink.
It's not cool to be an activist anymore because that's the norm.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. But what I'm saying about the polarization is it's not cool to just say, oh yes, I agree.
Yeah.
It's never been cool. It always drives
tell
more.
Tell them, kids. Tell them.
It always drives more clicks and attention, and even in the newspapers, it's always the pessimistic things are always driving more attention than optimistic things, and so that's why we have this kind of tendency to disagree with each other rather than agree. I think even this podcast so far has been a lot of like your opinions and our opinions, kind of maybe they're not fully lining up, but I think we can agree on a lot more topics.
Dude, literally, I really do think what you said earlier is very true. I think it's so important to be having these conversations between people, maybe very different. If you were very far right, maybe sitting here having a very different conversation right now. But, it's just so important that we're sitting here, especially as young people, somewhere like NYU especially, and just having this conversation. And I think we're like approaching conversations with a certain amount of respect and most importantly, empathy for the people that you're talking to is the most important thing you can do. People aren't evil because of their political views, unless you're like a racist or something like that. Okay. But because being a Republican doesn't make you evil. Okay. Being a Democrat doesn't make you evil either.
I mean, yeah, that's a great point.
It's definitely a great point, although that's not what the narrative was mere years ago. If you were a Republican, you were evil.
I think there's a difference there a little bit too. I think it's different between being a Republican, between being a Trump supporter.
That's also true. There's okay, that is true. But I think people also will associate being Republican with being anti-women or anti-whole demographics of people. And I think that's also not the greatest thing, because I think it's completely fair to be a Republican in fiscally conservative, at least if you believe in you don't think so? Tell me, because I think like that was always villainized to me. Even if you were relatively socially liberal, which I've always considered myself to be, even if I have some right-leaning fiscal policy, I feel like I still am lumped in with the rest of the conservative folks.
And I totally get what you're saying with that. My qualm kind of with the whole socially liberal, fiscally conservative is the fact that when we think about social issues, usually our mind is going to go straight to, Black and brown people and people of the LGBTQ plus community. That's not what social issues all encompasses too. Social issues really encompasses class too.
Right.
And when we talk about fiscal conservative policy, we are talking about different tax cuts for different groups of people. And we have to acknowledge that within liberal, social issues, there is a class divide too, which liberals are actively trying to combat. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about social issues too.
Well, I wouldn't say just liberals are trying to combat it. I would also say, but why? So then, why did the Liberal Party lose all the working class folks?
That's a great.
Do you have an
question.
answer to that?
Yeah, please. You have an answer to that?
Yeah,
I would love to know too.
Yeah. So in economics, we're learning about this, and I'm kind of trying to group my thoughts together on this issue. But I think the biggest thing is that a lot of industry was actually leaving America for cheaper labor elsewhere. And because you remember, America used to be the industry powerhouse of the world.
Yes.
We're talking about the Rust Belt being just a crazy industrial region. And so now that America is actually deindustrializing, a lot of folks are losing jobs. And that's just, and a lot of, jobs that people have had for decades, actually, because factories are leaving the U.S. And actually the Democratic Party didn't really capture this at all in the election. They didn't kind of see through that dynamic, but actually the Republican Party did with the tariffs. And that's what they were speaking to, really. They were not speaking to the trade imbalances. They were speaking to the folks that had their jobs stripped from them because of demilitarization. I actually don't think that their jobs were lost because of immigrants. I don't believe that. But I do think, yes, I do, because that's not true. That's factually not true.
Yeah.
They weren't taking that.
Too many American overseas.
Jobs.
They were sent overseas.
They were sent overseas, and that's the biggest issue. And that's really what the tariff thing was trying to combat. Again, I want to preface this by saying it's way cooler to say the immigrants are stealing your jobs. That is driving way more clicks.
It's so much more entertaining.
Yeah, it's so much more entertaining.
So much more sensational.
Right,
totally.
Right. But actually, that's where the working. I don't want to say middle class, because that's not, the working class is no longer the middle class. But the working class, that's where their vote was lost and brought to the Republican Party.
That's interesting. I think that's probably accurate. Obviously, you talk about back in the day, you're working for Ford and you're driving a Ford to work. Brand new one too, not a used one. You're driving a brand new Ford to work. And obviously today, realistically, I'm not sure that's attainable for the working class.
Yeah. So, Harrison, he brought up this interesting point in the previous podcast that we did. I think I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Please.
He said it's easier than ever to be successful, but it's harder than ever to do it the traditional way of kind of climbing up that career ladder and doing what
which is, let's say, higher education. One, it's get good grades in high school, go to college. Doesn't matter which college you go to. You can go to Hunter College, just like our friend John. But go to college, get a good job, invest in 401k, an IRA, take advantage of those government programs, which, by the way, are incredibly expensive. The IRA is incredibly expensive for the U.S. government, and so that's actually another debate. Some conservatives want to, they
get rid of the IRA.
That's different, but not necessarily get rid of it, but at least alter it. But essentially, they say, and do that, and retire, and live a nice life. And I think that is it's harder to do that on the wages that are being offered. And obviously the incredibly competitive and almost unattainable job market for some. Obviously, like many of these, with the cost of living rising, a lot of these the wages just aren't keeping up with the rate of inflation.
Yeah, that's true. So
1,000%.
Have you ever believed in the American dream? Because that's another thing. If you say the American dream, you're on the right. You're just a Republican.
That's another key one.
Yeah, you know what I mean. But okay, what do you think about that?
No, I do believe in the American dream, and I always will. I just think that's changed definitions a little bit. I totally get what you're saying, that this bar that we once called success has completely moved in the past 10 years, or not even 10 years, like 20 years or so. It's completely moved past what is, normally capable of. And a lot of that I will talk say it's, different changes in the economy, what you were saying, offshoring jobs for American people. Do totally get that. But also I think it's a culture thing too. We see people growing up, young kids who are looking up to billionaires, like Elon Musk, like Mark Zuckerberg, like Mr. Beast.
I look up to billionaires.
Yeah. No, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. But when you're defining that as your point of success, no longer having a house and a family with a picket fence, we can't say the American dream is dead because of certain things happening when we're actively aspiring to a higher point than any other generation was. Not necessarily anything wrong with that.
That's actually a good point.
But I think it places this expectation on people like us, especially too, where, we come out of college and we're like, where's my Lamborghini?
Right. Very true.
And it takes time to get that way. And it happens to, people don't acknowledge how few billionaires there are in the world.
There's incredibly few.
Yeah.
And the original definition of the American dream was just owning a home.
Oh, really?
Just a house.
Yeah.
It was just a house with a picket fence, dude. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting. On the last episode that we did, the great Jared Watson, he talked about this. He says you got to look ahead a little bit more than people do. First of all, I mentioned that I look up to billionaires. I don't look up to billionaires because they make $1 billion. I look up to billionaires because they built something with their own hands, and they most of the time, I should say, they built something with their own hands, and they're really smart people that made it work. At the end of the day, they used a system that exists for all of us already. We can't change that, but they use that system to get ahead and to kind of make a pretty great success for themselves. And that's why I look up to them. Not exactly because they actually make a lot of money, but Jared talked a lot about the goal should be for your family. That's what your goal should be. To even this law stuff that you're doing, whatever business stuff that we're doing should be for your family. Do you agree?
Of course I agree. That's obviously the number one source of happiness. Materialistic things do not bring happiness in the world. And I think actually everybody more and more people are understanding that actually with social media, because there are so many interviews going around on social media these days where you interview a billionaire or multimillionaire, guys who's worth in the 9-10 figures. And they say, yeah, man, I achieved those dreams like 10 years ago. I bought the yacht, I bought the Lambo, and it doesn't mean anything to me. I just want to spend time with my family and have good health, honestly. And that vision of the American dream is actually still alive. And this is actually where I do see a really interesting thing with the Republicans. Dave Ramsey, do you know who he is?
I'm not familiar now.
Do you know who he is?
Yeah, I sure do.
Yes. So he is a personal finance expert, and he's most definitely a conservative guy.
Okay.
He actually still believes in just the regular life, that the American dream can be achieved just by working the regular job. He says, whether you or not you go to college is fine. Obviously, it's a fact that some jobs are unattainable if you don't go to college. A lot of the middle management positions in America are unattainable. But he says, on an average American salary, you can retire with everything you need to be happy. You just need to stay out of debt, and you need to, prioritize. You need to take advantage of your number one wealth building tool, which is your income. You don't need to do anything crazy. You don't need to be doing the Robert Kiyosaki method of, investing in real estate, making your money work for you overnight. He says you need to live a modest life. You need to stay out of debt, which most Americans do not do. He says if you see a really nice car outside a middle class home, you know that those guys aren't doing too hot. Really, you need to. That's what he says, and he says the American dream can absolutely be achieved. You can retire with many, many millions of dollars just by using IRA and 401k. And actually, and he's a very conservative guy, but I still feel like, and I agree with that at one point, but I still feel like it's incredibly hard to get ahead that way. So do you think who is right at the end of the day? There's so many different opinions and ways to go about it. I'll tell you.
Nobody,
I don't even know.
He's got all the answers.
Nobody is right, actually, in that. And I think, Caroline, what you're doing, and you have a passion, and you have a passion for helping people, and you think law that is the tool to go about it. That's the quote that you mentioned.
There is.
It stuck with me through this episode because I've been thinking about that in my own life. And I think the biggest thing is just you got to do what you love. And you got to do what you're passionate about.
Just don't overthink it.
Don't overthink it. The money will always follow.
The money will follow.
Even if you love, give me an example where money will not follow, and I'll give you an example where it does.
Yeah, so I think what you were saying here is really interesting. And, for some people, it really is that simple. If you are doing a job, whatever job that may be, if you're investing properly, if you're following the law, you will be able to be successful. I think that kind of divides where we separate kind of people as left-leaning views and right-leaning views. I agree with you, but I do believe there are a large number of people actually in America who can do everything right, and it still doesn't quite work for them for a number of different reasons. Being born below the poverty line is one of the major ones. Being born without access to an education. I'm from Indiana, and in Indianapolis, the public school system is so horrible. It's awful. And, I'm someone who had the privilege of having access to a private school. A lot of people didn't have that. The differences between the people in my graduating class going to college versus the people in the public high schools in Indianapolis going to college, huge, huge, huge disparity. Mm-hmm, and there's some people born with circumstances, whether that be taking care of family members who are sick, and that's what their entire life is dedicated to doing. They'll never be able to go to college and get a good enough job so that they can invest and follow the law and set up a social security so they're going to be set for the rest of their life in their retirement to reach that level of success, the American dream. There are certain foundations of how a person is born in the world that they exist in that not only make it so much more difficult than the average person, but in some cases really do make it next to impossible.
Yeah, we might need a second to think about that one. That's a great point. I don't think it's impossible. Always. I think that's why America is a great country.
Yeah, but I will say, do you know a lot of very successful executives and billionaires too? They attribute a lot of their success to one thing. Do you know what that is?
What's that?
Luck.
They do.
Luck.
But that really goes for the billionaires. I also hear them. They all say that if they're given zero again, they could easily make 10 plus million just based on what they know. Listen. And how they know businesses work and how they know people work.
Right. So my question is, how are you going to give that
to get
knowledge
a B next to your name? You need to absolutely be lucky. But to get a few M's next to your name, absolutely not. And we know that that based on the evidence, happiness does not come from a B. It comes from, but in theory, yes. Obviously, you would like to have a few $1 million to provide for your family and whatnot. So continue with what you were saying.
No, I didn't have much to add. I was just saying that luck and risk are the two opposite sides of the coin. So, and even in America, always you had to risk it for the biscuit. Always. And of course, luck is a big part of it, but you have to risk something to get a big reward back. And I think even, in the second to last episode, we talked about this hypothetical guy, John, who grows up in the
Tell me more about John.
Yeah. So John, he grows up, I don't want to say this whole thing again, but,
say it again.
John, he grows up in the Bronx, and he's in a very, very low income area. His family lives on food stamps and whatnot. And he's robbed 5 to 6 times a year.
Probably 6,
God,
honestly.
John,
It's so dangerous
kid.
in Mott Haven. It's so dangerous.
It's pretty
at least
dangerous.
6 times a year.
It's pretty dangerous.
So he only cares a few bucks on him. Honestly.
This poor
That's all he
kid.
cares. No debit card, no nothing.
It's very sad, John's story. But the thing is, John, he goes to school and he does well in school, and he doesn't go to a great school. He goes to, I said Hunter College.
Actually, it's a decent school.
Hunter College
That's notoriously a pretty good school.
He goes to SUNY Binghamton.
No, wait. Any school that we say people from that school will not appreciate that.
Okay.
So he does not go to a very nice school.
No.
Probably this some state school, but he does really well there, and he
schools.
goes to law school, and he gets his law degree, and now he's just an associate at a law firm, and he moves his way up, and he's just a really successful, smart guy that's worked really hard throughout his life. It's possible.
But for guys like him, I think we came to the conclusion that education's the way out.
But education is not so expensive in America that you can't swim out of it. I mean, it's $15K to go to Oregon, where we're from. It's University of Oregon. It's $15K, including
and obviously there's
housing.
many federal grants and loans that you can get.
Right, but I think you guys are
year.
not ignoring the fact, but money is not the only factor in this equation. Yeah. So you're talking about John as an individual person. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that we are talking about this right after earlier we were talking about how, people in this generation are just more individualistic. They're less likely to care about, the person sitting next to them or their neighbor because of however society has progressed. So John is talking about it as an individual. John in reality probably has a family. John in reality may have a grandparent that has dementia or Alzheimer's that they have to take care of. John in reality may have the money to go to college, but he can't take that time from taking care of his grandfather to go to college. Maybe he has the money, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he can't afford that time right now because he has 10 other responsibilities overtaking John that have nothing to do with school.
So I think an argument to that is when obviously, a counterpoint, I should say, to that is what do we do about his grandpa? Obviously, because we know John himself can get himself out of poverty, but what do we do about his grandpa?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
Welfare.
Like, what do we expect?
So the American government. So I think that the liberals expect welfare,
and that's why I said that's kind of where we divide as people who lean more Republican, people who lean more Democrat.
Right, but you have to. Their welfare is not just flick of the wrist and you get a bunch of money. I mean, those programs cost hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And I don't know if I should say trillions, but they definitely cost in the billions and hundreds of billions.
Isn't it trillions?
Surely.
Some of them are absolutely. It depends on the program. It depends on the welfare program. I think SNAP, obviously supplemental nutrition, that is in the billions, trillions. But in theory, those welfare programs have downsides and often they're very inflationary usually, and that also comes back to bite John's family too. So it's kind of a never-ending loop. That the question is, how far do we go to try to take care of every single possible situation that every family might have?
No, and I totally get that, and I think that I totally get that perspective actually. But I think that when we're talking about this kind of situation where somebody wants to go to college, they can't because they're taking care of a family member, whatever it may be, a lot of people's minds will immediately jump to welfare. A lot of conservatives especially too think, Democrats just want to give everybody handouts.
Yeah. Right.
And that's not necessarily what welfare necessarily means. Welfare, in my opinion, means investing in institutions so that people are able to lift themselves from the ground up, eventually without the need of any welfare from the government. That means investing in our education system. That means, investing in our healthcare systems, people can get the help that they need and have it affordably. And those are more social liberal policies. Those do cost money to create. If you want people to stop getting handouts, you have to invest in the infrastructure that they depend on for that welfare. And you can't do that without investment. You can't do that without money. So if we're asking people to not take handouts, we can't just cut that off at the wrist.
So we're moving closer and closer to a socialist regime there. Obviously, we see what happens to healthcare in Canada if we fully subsidize it by the government. It becomes a much different situation. And obviously, still in America, if you're a hospital and you have a dying patient who comes into the emergency room, every hospital in the country is going to take care of them. And that's why healthcare and insurance has gotten so expensive, because they have to cover the cost of that. And there is no hospital in the country that will turn away a patient who's sick. And healthcare is incredibly flawed right now and very complicated. I don't even want to get into it because I don't know enough about it. But I know that it's very expensive and very flawed. But I also know that we have the best healthcare system in the world. And I know for sure that it would take a serious dip if we fully subsidize it by the government.
Do we have the best healthcare system in the
He means quality.
I mean in quality of care.
That's
quality of care. If you have an advanced cancer or heart condition and you need open heart surgery, I'm going to MD Anderson in Houston. I'm going to Memorial Sloan Kettering up on 60th Avenue. Right?
Wow, you're bringing the names out.
I'm not going to. I'm not going.
We talked about how he's hypochondriac. I see it now.
I'm not going to Toronto. So, did you have a point that you were hoping to add?
No, I was just. I guess this is a great conversation. I guess that we're having. I wanted to maybe ask Caroline some of your views around NYU and how
Yeah, of course.
Sure.
Who did you have? You had some questions around this issue, right? Around how NYU kind of students are approaching success and whatnot.
I want you to know. I want to know how you think NYU students are feeling just on a day-to-day basis.
Also, yes. Also, we don't want you to speak for all women. We do not want you to do that.
I love being the first woman on this podcast. So we're really getting those women views out.
As the first, yes, exactly. As the first woman on our podcast, we just want to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
And how you think some of your girls might be thinking as well.
Some of my girls.
Yes.
some of our girls. Yeah. Yes. All right.
I can't say that.
No, you can say that.
Okay.
Well, that's good. It's a good question. I think in general, being a woman on this campus, it's going to be a lot better than a lot of other people, my friends experience, especially too, in their classes. In my experience, it's been very equal within classrooms of men and women participating and being able to voice their own opinions and not having to, explain themselves to a certain extent where it's like, this toes the line into misogyny. You know what I'm talking about?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And just having that equal representation and people being able to voice their opinions, I find it very, very good here, in my opinion. And maybe that'll be different for you, but I find it pretty equal. And, I'm in a lot of discussion-based classes, and my classes that I'm taking, I will admit they do lean more left. But I think it's a pretty good mix for people. People are allowed to express their opinions, and they're pretty well respected. And I have people in my classes who do express conservative points, and they're going to get some, heat from it, but it's never going to be derogatory. It's never going to be hateful. They're just asking questions,
Sure. Do you feel safe on campus?
Ooh, great question. Depends where I am. Near campus, yeah, I feel really safe.
Our security has gotten really tight, really, really tight.
It has.
Yeah, near campus, I feel pretty safe.
Okay.
Yeah, if I'm walking home, I, as a rule, don't usually walk home alone late at night.
Right.
So
I think that's New York. It's still pretty.
I just gotta be careful. I don't think it's a life or death kind of thing. Like we're living in an active war zone. I think you got to use some common sense skills.
Right. I hear you on that. But overall, you're saying that that NYU and just universities in general do a pretty good. I guess you should say NYU. It does a pretty good job of kind of keeping it more or less equal.
Yeah.
What you're saying? Okay. Good.
Sure.
Do you think that you and your girls,
my girls,
are do you all value? Do you think if you all sit down and you're like, man, I'm so thankful to be in higher education right now. I know it's going to enrich my life going forward. I know that I'm going to have a better life because I went to this school. Because I definitely do not feel that way about NYU. Do you feel that way?
I'm very grateful to be at NYU.
I'm very grateful to be at NYU, but I don't know it's going to actually lead to more success in my life than if I didn't go. You go. Tell me.
Yeah, so I was actually talking about this topic earlier.
Then you go after.
And I'm really grateful to be here, and I wouldn't trade it for the world, just the experience it's given me. I was saying to one of my friends the other day that if I knew that I was pretty set on law school when I was first going to college, might have gone to a state school,
Okay.
just because of cost-wise and everything like that. But in terms of, if I think this college is bettering me, I really do. I'm sure it's different for you guys and for me especially too, because I'm in the humanities program. And I'm in global programming too, which NYU is known to have, one of the best global programming in the country. So I feel like I'm in the right place for what I want to do. And do you guys feel differently being in the finance realm?
No, not at all. I'm actually pretty grateful. Okay, so what you bring up is a good point about the actual quality of education is never that different at NYU versus other schools. Actually, some of the brightest professors are at state schools.
Oh, 1,000% agree.
Yeah, yes. And so that was never my issue. The biggest thing is if you go out on a Friday night and you go by Bope's library, it's packed.
Correct.
It's packed.
Yeah.
And that is a huge
That's my
thing.
favorite part. That's my favorite part for sure.
I mean, these guys are really smart here.
People care about what they're doing too.
People care, and actually, people
they like
care
to learn.
Yes, and my thing is they people care for the money, which I disagree with, but nonetheless they care just the same. And to me, walking by and having every single person in my class be a very smart person, a lot of them much smarter than I am, is awesome. Actually, you always got to surround yourself.
It's intellectually stimulating.
Intellectually stimulating.
And there's people, smart people on all different campuses, state schools included, and just all of that. Smart people everywhere.
100%.
Yeah, no, but I do think people here are more want to voice their opinion more.
I think it's just the sheer number of them.
Well, yeah. Well, the extent to which NYU actually is prestigious or gets you a job out of undergrad is not
that's what
a huge
I mean.
difference.
In the career that at least I'm pursuing, which I actually have absolutely no clue with the career that I'm pursuing, but if I'm staying on track, I guess it is. I'm obviously kind of falling into the finance trap, which many NYU students do.
Kind of doing public policy.
Well, I am.
Well, you are.
I am technically doing public policy on paper, but I'm definitely not going to law school or have any interest in. Actually, I do have interest in politics, but I don't really have interest in law.
You don't have to be in law to be in politics.
I think it would be fascinating to go to law school and learn it, but I don't really have interest in practicing law, I should say.
A lot of people do that, though. I mean, it's an expense for sure, but if you get scholarships or funds, a lot of people go. A lot of politicians have been to law school.
Let me tell you, no law school these days wants me. That's for sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe a few, but not not too many.
Keep your options open, man. You never know.
I mean, it's a fascinating education for sure, and I think obviously everybody the world would be a lot different if everybody knew the law.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
Caroline, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I just popped in my head, and it's completely off topic to everything that we talk about.
Fine.
That we have talked about this far. Actually, it's on topic with the politics stuff.
Okay.
JD Vance.
Oh Lord.
Yes, talks a lot about the American family. He talks a lot about these childless women, right? Women that do not want to have children in America, and he sees that as a huge issue. What do you think? How do you kind of see? This is we're getting into the weeds here. How do you balance wanting to have a career for yourself and wanting to be successful in your career and actually potentially being a mother? How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think
that's a good question.
It's a really good question. Do you guys feel like there's a balance between your careers and being fathers?
So we don't think about it in the same way at all as men.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to ask you. I think there's also just a little bit of tinge of stigma about stay-at-home mothers. Do you feel this way or not?
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Being a stay-at-home mom is the hardest job in the world.
Right.
Any stay-at-home mom will tell you that.
But I think a lot of kind of successful, educated women feel like that's not the path.
I agree.
For them.
This is a great point. I'd love to. Great. Thanks for asking that question. Continue. I want to hear your insights.
No, we don't want you to get into the personal stuff, but maybe around kind of that realm that you see. Yeah. What are your attitudes on this?
So as of right now, I'm 20 years old.
Of course.
I'm not thinking about kids or a family right now, and I don't think I will be for a foreseeable future. I'm not going to come out and say I'm never going to, have a family. I would love to have a family one day, maybe,
sure.
But maybe that'll change. I just don't really have a solid opinion on that right now.
So that's completely understandable. I guess what I meant more is, do you feel degraded by being by potentially being a stay-at-home mother? No. Would you feel degraded? Is what I mean.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think opinions have changed in that a little bit. We have a funny story. I remember my dad told me this. My dad comes from a family of 7 boys. He's the youngest, and his mom's a stay-at-home mom. And someone came over to the house at one point, someone who was working with his dad, I think, maybe a friend of one of his brothers. And she came over and asked my grandma, she's like, does it ever bother you not having a career? And she was like, I do have a career.
Right.
This is my job right here, and I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. This is like getting into very, very liberal topic here.
It is, but when you think about it, I don't think it should be necessarily. I don't think it should be divided into liberal and conservative, whether you want to be a mom or not. When I go into when I've talked to different groups of well-educated women, or let's say not necessarily women that are older than me, but women that go to schools that are maybe a little tougher to get into, I would say, or have aspirations to be lawyers or doctors. And I listened to and I asked this, well, I'm not going around asking this question, but through the grapevine, I guess I have heard a few different perspectives.
You're going around people in the street being like, how do you feel about motherhood?
Some being more left-leaning folks and others being more right-leaning. And I feel like the left-leaning women that are very motivated to go into a professional field, they villainize the mother thing. Oh, not directly or outwardly. They'll say, sure. It's totally hard to be a mother, but they're like, but I'd never do it. I'd never do it. They make it very clear that they would never do something like that. They might not even want kids. They almost talk. I don't know if that's instilled by them. I don't know if that's and it's the right, the girls on the right, more conservative girls, they don't have that opinion. They don't have that strong, that kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but that unspoken distaste for being a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to preface this by saying we're not asking you if you want kids or not. That's not exactly what we're saying. We're just kind of asking about the general the general attitude.
But what do you think about that?
Yes, I totally get what you're saying. And I can kind of explain why that is a difference. Maybe not between Republicans and Democrats with the women, but with women in general, I can kind of talk to that a little bit. When you ask a woman if she wants children, usually her response, like you said, is going to be one of the two. When you ask men if they want children, sometimes their response is, oh yeah, maybe a couple of years, like to come home, see a few little ones running around the backyard.
Sure.
Because culturally, there is such a disparity. And this is blatantly obvious, but just as a reminder, such disparity in the responsibilities of a mother and a father. The mother is the one who is supposed to be hands-on with the kids. The one who's supposed to be organizing the household, taking them to class, taking them to extracurriculars. The father kind of has this perspective as the mother's already going to do that. I'm just going to be able to go to work, come home, rub my kid's hair and call it a night.
Yes.
So there is a very different outlook on what motherhood and fatherhood looks like between men and women, which is why women understand what that responsibility looks like and what it's going to entail. Hence why they're going to be more, I wouldn't say disdainful, but more hesitant to start a family, where men, on the other hand, are going to be more enthusiastic to start families.
Okay, that's super interesting. And I've been kind of one of the biggest proponents of being a mother, and just being a woman is so much harder than being a man. Frankly, there's so many challenges that we never even think about, Harrison. We never think about these things. For example, just like you said, motherhood and fatherhood. I think of fatherhood as going to the movies with my little one, but I think a lot of women think of motherhood as, man, I gotta be
bringing up at 3 a.m. child into the world, and of course, bringing a human.
Exactly.
It's a big deal.
Exactly. And of course, like, fathers also take care of children. I think this is definitely flipped around a little bit, maybe. I think fathers are starting to take care of children a little bit more than mothers, but not nearly as much as they should, in my opinion. But regardless, that was just a little something that
was a good question
that Harrison and I have talked about.
I have one more question for you that I think plays into this kind of discrepancy between the two parties, and it has to do with mental health.
Okay.
One of the things that I think that has been probably one of the more beneficial things that have come out of social media is conversation around mental health. And I actually think that something that more liberal people have done well is spark these conversations around it. They post it on social media, and it's become something that is more on people's minds. Conservatives have traditionally pushed it away a little bit as kind of a non-issue. They've always considered it as, you're just making excuses for yourself. And while it is not an excuse, mental health, I don't think it's an excuse in life to not accomplish things because many, many people have to deal with it. I do really like that as a society, we're talking about it more, because I think it's one of the biggest things that everybody needs to get a grip on is their mental health. They need to understand people, their emotions, how they work. I think as a society, we'd be so much better off if this was the case and people actually prioritized it instead of just prioritizing their career and everything else and just trying to distract themselves from mental health. How, as an NYU student and a woman in 2025, how do you think mental health plays into the role of just growing up, and just what is its significance today?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question.
Very loaded question, but I think you can handle it.
No, I think it's a great question. It's very well worded too. How do I even start? I think the conversation surrounding mental health is so important, and we've kind of grown up with it too. especially. We've grown up around these conversations. We've grown up knowing what anxiety means, what depression means. I think that's really, really a great thing, and something I definitely want to, if I do decide to have a family one day, I want to raise my kids on, you know? But I think it comes with this overwhelming also feeling of empathy towards people, which is the thing I really, really love about it. Being able to understand someone else, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and saying, I may not be able to have this brain function. I don't understand what this feeling of anxiety is like. I don't understand what not being able to get out of my bed in the morning feels like. But I understand that for you, it's real and you need to be taken care of. And that's what I love the most out of this entire thing, I will say.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with this. And I'm going to be honest with you. I was one of those people that always thought that mental health was not a non-issue. For me, yeah. I always thought that I could always get a grip on myself. And this is actually
tell you can't always get a grip on yourself.
Yeah, you can definitely.
This is actually a very masculine thing. I think a lot of men feel like, yes, I need to always be locked in. I always need to have a grip. Yeah, I always need to have a grip on what I'm doing. And any time that I'm acting a strange way or I'm having strange feelings, I just have to shut it off, right? And I've kind of actually been a proponent of this in the past, unfortunately, and just kind of. Since entering college, I'm kind of coming around to the idea that actually there are some things that I have a hard time controlling on my own. And so, just having an open conversation about keeping that, help going, like being able to get help for issues like this, I think is pretty important. And, everybody suffers from some kind of disorder. That's the biggest thing.
Yes, they do.
It's either undiagnosed or it's very small, but I could say back in the 60s, you're either normal or you're mental.
Right.
There's two things,
right.
And I think it's a huge spectrum, and I think that we should actually definitely consider that.
I do have a question for you guys too. I know it's kind of like a huge trope thing, like girls all sitting together, sleepover, crying about their feelings. I'm not going to go as far to say that's true, but I do talk with my friends a lot about certain things going on, like in my brain, whether it be anxiety or whatever it is. Do you feel like as men, especially young men, you're able to talk to your friends about things that are happening like that?
I do now.
Yeah,
definitely. At first I'm always been a bit of an open guy, realistically. Would you agree? Probably.
You have, yes.
Yeah, I have. And, but in the last, I don't know, it's 50-50 because sometimes it is having the courage to talk to your friends and trusting in them. But also I think society plays a part too. It's just a little bit less stigmatized these days. And I feel totally fine talking about it.
I am not an open person generally when it comes to my mental health and my personal life, even with my closest friends. And I think a lot of this comes from this masculine urge to appear like a strong person, appear like a strong man. Honestly, it's a little bit, talking about this on air with everybody. It's kind of hard to talk about, but I think we can handle this. I think in the past, to this day, kind of try to have this strong image, right? And I think a lot of men do. And that kind of gives way to not talking about your feelings with your friends. I totally suffer from this. Harrison here, he's been my best friend since 8th grade, but we've been friends since 7th grade. I mean, we basically have known each other for 10 years.
We've been to many continents together.
We have been to almost every continent
really
together.
Friendship.
And it's awesome. But even to Harrison, I might not share everything that I'm feeling. Of
course.
And it's actually hard because communication is so important. And a lot of times, I'm just going to speak in Gen Z language. People just think you're a tweaker.
That's very
in fact, something.
I've been called tweaker so many times. Many times.
I've been called a tweaker many times.
Yeah. Right, anyone with anxiety or any kind of panic attack disorder is going to be called a tweaker.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes it's all in good fun. Sometimes you're like, guys, stop it.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. But I think, that's the biggest thing for me. I've actually never been open, and I'm still not really open with even the people that I consider closest to me. And I think that part of it is the societal thing. Part of it is the pressure that I've put on myself a little bit as well.
Yeah,
and I think talking about it is awesome. It's probably not going to make me change right away about the way that I handle things, but I think it's something important to consider. Actually, for once on this podcast, Harrison and I have a different perspective, which is kind of awesome.
There you go.
That you caught that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Lots to talk about. Any final thoughts from the folks?
I have no final thoughts. Caroline, you've been an amazing guest.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me over, guys.
I mean, this has been a great episode.
I'm sure we didn't touch on everything we wanted to, but hey,
maybe a part 2's in the future.
Part two is in order.
Yes. Part 2 might be coming indeed.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in to our findings show. Comment down below what you think of the name, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.